Hello BookTube, and welcome to my weekly reading vlog. Before we jump into it this week, there are a couple of housekeeping details I want to get out of the way, and I'll try and keep this brief and not ramble on too long. But one thing I want to say is when I first set up this video vlog system, this weekly reading vlog 5 weeks ago, in the first video I did, I spent a lot of time blathering on about exactly what this weekly reading vlog would be like and what I hope to accomplish and how each week would work. And among the things I said in that initial video was that there may be some weeks when my weekly reading was not sufficient to fill up an entire video, and in that case I would just talk about anything I had listened to or read that week. And I had this whole system outlined where I would start off first with other BookTube news or other BookTube videos I had watched, and then go into YouTube videos in general, and then maybe go into print publications, etc. And I've decided that was one of my less inspired ideas for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I have never yet had a weekly reading vlog in which I had time to get to that, because even on a week when I haven't read that much, I tend to be long-winded and just blather on about the few pages that I have read, which is what's happened in every weekly reading vlog so far. So clearly filling time is not an issue for me, for better or for worse. But the other thing that has struck me after having a few weeks to think about it is there is no law that says I have to fill up 30 minutes each time I do one of these. You know, if I have a week that was light on reading and I only do 10 minutes of weekly reading vlogs, maybe that's better for all of us. And if I do decide that I want to spend time talking about some of the other stuff, like, you know, this week in BookTube, or my take on the current events news that I've been reading this week, etc., I can spin those out into separate vlog series, which I will not be doing anytime soon. I'm busy enough as it is, and sometimes just finding the time to make these weekly reading vlogs is a bit of a struggle. I don't know how many people watched last week and could hear the toddler screaming in the background trying to get into this room. And so some weeks, more often than not, just negotiating the 30 minutes to myself to get some private time in this room with the wife and the toddler is somewhat of an issue. But if at some point in the future, maybe when I have more free time in 10 years, or who knows, whenever that time may be, I might decide to do it this week in BookTube, or my take on the current events for this week, or something like that. But that will not be coming. That will not be coming anytime within the next few weeks, for sure. The other detail is much shorter, which is this week I had another week where I didn't get much reading done. Last week I had a week where I didn't get much reading done, and last week I went through some of the excuses why I didn't get that much reading done, deadlines at work. This week I also didn't get much reading done, and I feel like there's a temptation to make excuses for what I didn't get done as well this week and talk about work and stuff like that. But the thought occurred to me that if I start doing this, there's no end to it. Every week I'm going to be saying, okay, I'm sorry I didn't get more reading done, been doing this or that at work. And that's going to get repetitive real fast, for one. And two, it has a potential to cause me to divulge more about my work life or my private life than I want to. My goal has been to try and keep as much as possible a dividing line between the BookTube stuff and my work or personal life. So, I have always struggled to read what I feel is an appropriate amount to read, but going forward I'm going to try to resist the temptation to make excuses about it, or to say why this week was light on reading. You can just assume that any week that was light on reading, I was busy with other stuff. Okay, that being said, this week was light on reading. I've got about 10 books on my shelf that I've started but not finished. But this week, as for the past few weeks, it was these 3 that I tried to make headway on. The Hand of Oberon, part of the Chronicles of Amber series, which I actually finished this week. Finished this on Wednesday, April 21st. Now, I've got a bit of a quirk that I've developed for several years now, ever since I started reviewing books on my weblog, which is, if it takes me a few days or a few weeks to write a review, I try and keep reading the book to keep it fresh in my memory. So once I finish the book, then I go back and start rereading the beginning parts of it. It's another one of the reasons why I get through not as many books as I would like to each year, is because I spend a fair amount of time writing a written review of them and rereading parts of them while I'm writing that written review. I don't know, it's a trade-off, obviously, but over the years I've decided that I really like having a detailed record of what I've read and my thoughts on it, and so that's the trade-off. Anyways, the last few chapters of The Hand of Oberon were very good, very suspenseful. They very much held my attention. And then there is that big twist at the end, which I was not expecting at all. And then I went back to the beginning, and I've only reread a couple pages now at the beginning. But right from those couple pages, you can see that twist at the end is being foreshadowed. And that's all I'll say about this for now. If all goes well, within this week or certainly within the next week, I'll have a separate video reviewing The Hand of Oberon. The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle, I made a little bit of progress on. How many pages did I read this week? I don't know. I think I read about roughly maybe 30 or 40 pages. I finished up the story about Alan Dale and Friar Tuck. So in this book, which again is apparently based off the old ballads, Alan Dale and Friar Tuck both join Robin Hood's band in the same adventure. Alan Dale is upset because his one true love is marrying someone else, and they need a friar to help them get married. Alan Dale and his one true love, and that's where Friar Tuck comes in. And so it's one big story which encompasses both Alan Dale and Friar Tuck. And then Friar Tuck at the end asked to join Robin Hood's band. Did Alan Dale actually ask to join Robin Hood's band, or was it just assumed? I'm not sure. And then Alan Dale gets married to his one true love, and there's a thing where Robin Hood outsmarts the bishop, as he always does. The theme of Robin Hood the trickster is prominent in these stories. One question I was left wondering a little bit, though, is up until now there's been no indication that there's women hanging around in Sherwood Forest with the rest of the merry men. And Maid Marian has actually not been present in this book at all, and I'm up to page 182 now. I think maybe there was a brief mention of her at the beginning, if I remember right, like a one-sentence mention, and then she hasn't even been mentioned ever since then. So I'm not quite sure if Alan Dale's wife is now joining the merry men with them in Sherwood Forest. I guess she must be, because I don't know where else she would go after the two of them got married. I guess as I keep reading, I'll keep my eyes open for any further mention of Alan Dale's wife with them. Yeah, and see if Maid Marian ever pops up in this book. Okay, so that's the Adventures of Robin Hood, the Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Next, shifting gears completely, we're going to Chomsky's Universal Grammar, an Introduction, 2nd edition by V.J. Cook and Mark Newsom. So let's get into the weeds a little bit with this one because there is plenty to discuss. This week I read from page 90 to page 116, and I made lots of notes in the margins, and I've got maybe lots of points I can talk about. By the way, this book as well is on my second reading now. Again, this is another case where I'm still trying to formulate my thoughts for a written review. And while I'm doing that, I've been spending my time trying to reread parts of this book. So, I left off, I think, talking last time about the poverty of the stimulus argument, which had been developed in pages... What pages were those? Yeah, pages 81 to 85. And I talked about that in last week's reading vlog. It comes up again on pages 89 to 92 in a section that they call the evidence available to the L1 learner. And this seems to me to just be a repeat of the poverty of the stimulus argument in different wording. I'm a little bit confused about why this has a separate heading a little bit later on in the same chapter. Other than to say that this book can be like that sometimes. They do repeat a lot of the information, especially at the beginning when they're establishing the basics. Now, later on in the book, I'm going to have the opposite complaint, where I felt like they're rushing through way too much technical information way too quickly. And I don't understand any of it. But at the beginning of the book, and the beginning maybe meaning the first 200 pages, there's a lot of maybe repetition of the arguments. So they're talking about the poverty of the stimulus argument, and they make the case about what's the name of the game? Snooker. They make the case with snooker. Now, I actually don't know how to play snooker. Maybe it's more of a British thing than an American thing. I mean, I know how to play pool, and I think snooker is a similar game on a billiards table, but different, I don't know. But actually, they say right here that if you don't know how to play snooker, so much the better in terms of understanding the analogy. Apparently in snooker, there are certain sequences of balls that are permissible to hit into the pockets or whatever, and there are certain sequences of balls that are not permissible to hit into the pockets. And they give an example of Joe Smith, who learned snooker only from watching television, apparently without any commentary, just from silent television. So by watching the snooker on television, he can see which sequences of balls are permissible. But what he doesn't have any access to are which sequences of balls are not permissible, because he only sees what the players are doing. And because he's watching it on TV, he's watching the pros play. So there's no opportunity to see any mistakes corrected because he's only watching the proficient snooker players. So he will know which sequences are permissible, but if he were to play snooker himself, he would have to be reduced to guessing at which sequences are not permissible. And that's... There will be sequences that he hasn't seen when he's watching snooker on TV. But it's possible that these sequences he hasn't seen them just because they're rare. So they could be permissible, but they're rare. And this, of course, is tying into the poverty of the stimulus argument. And this is something that I think is inherent to the poverty of the stimulus argument. Namely that in order to learn English or any other language just from the input alone, the grammar of English, you would need some sort of negative input, or you would need negative evidence, such as explicit correction or explanations of why certain sequences are not permissible, and this that you don't get from the input. He also talks about the different. Again, this is a repeat of what he said before, but talking about the positive evidence for whether English is head first or whether Japanese is head last. Now, I'm bringing the camera over here because I think there's a typo here, but maybe I'll get a second opinion by asking the YouTube hive mind. It's giving an example of a Japanese sentence being head last, and they say Mukashi oji-san to oba-san ga koya ni sunde imashita. But then they have the mukashi here twice. So I put, well, why do they have it twice? I think that's a typo. Although one is capitalized and one's not. So maybe there's some sort of convention in linguistic books where you show that the capitalization, I don't know. I don't know. This seems like a petty thing to bring up, and it probably is. But I bring it up because later on in the book, I'm going to have a lot of trouble understanding what's going on, and I'm suspecting later in the book there are a lot of typos. But I'm not sure because I'm not understanding the content of the book. So it's difficult for me to say if there are mistakes being made in the book or if I've just reached my limits of understanding. But here, this seems like a mistake where they have the mukashi twice. Okay, moving on. Last week in the video vlog, I was talking about the poverty of the stimulus argument. And I said, they don't bring it up in this book, but Steven Pinker, in his book, The Language Instinct, which is a book on Chomsky and linguistics for people who don't want to be bothered with the technicalities, just a very simple book on Chomsky and linguistics. I said that Steven Pinker reinforces the argument about poverty of the stimulus by talking about how in middle-class white families it's quite common to give the baby a lot of input, but in other cultures or in other economic groups it's less common for people to spend a lot of time talking to the baby in baby talk and giving them that structured input. And yet everyone everywhere learns their native language. So I brought that in to reinforce the poverty of the stimulus. It struck me, though, after the camera shut off and after I had some time to think about it, that I misspoke there. Because the poverty of the stimulus argument is not based on how much input, on the differences in input that different children are getting. The poverty of the stimulus argument applies even to a child who's getting tons of good input. So even under, the most privileged child in the world who's getting their parents talking to them all the time and getting very structured, perfect input from the child, from the parents, even in those cases, according to the theory of the poverty of the stimulus, they wouldn't be able to acquire things like structural dependency. I think the argument goes they wouldn't be able to acquire it because they would need the negative evidence. And the negative evidence is not available in the poverty, the negative evidence is not available in the input according to the poverty of the stimulus argument because of that snooker analogy I was just mentioning. Sorry, stumbling over my words here. So that's one reason why I misspoke last week by mentioning that argument in the poverty of the stimulus. The other reason I misspoke is, as it turns out, if I had just read a few more pages further in this book, they talk about the exact same thing Steven Pinker did. So they've and I obviously had forgotten this from the previous time I read the book, but pages 91 through 90, pages 91 through 102 here are very much the same ground that Steven Pinker covers in The Language Instinct. So they talk about what evidence has to be available to explain language acquisition, first language acquisition by a child. So they said it has to occur. So if you have a theory about how a child learns their first language, you have to demonstrate that this occurs. But you also have to show that it's uniform, because the amount of language that a child is exposed to and the style of whether or not a child gets simplified input or whether or not the child gets correction varies widely from culture to culture. Where is that section here? They're talking about the criterion of uniformity, and they say uniformity is a stronger form of occurrence. It is not enough to show that a certain type of evidence is available to one child. It must be available to all children. A model of language acquisition cannot rely on a particular feature of the environment unless it is available to all children. Children are capable of acquiring their first language despite wide differences in their situations within a single culture and across different cultures. Baby talk words such as puff puff or bow wow are used by some parents in Britain and shunned by others. Some children are told, "Open the window." Some asked, "Could you open the window?" Yet although children differ in the extent to which they are able to use language, they nevertheless appear to attain the same grammatical competence. So long as the environment contains a certain amount of language, it appears not to be crucial to the acquisition of grammatical competence what this sample consists of. Any human child learns any human language, whatever the situation. That's exactly what's the point Steven Pinker makes in his book. So the requirements for language evidence for the child. So explaining how a child learns their first language. The requirements for the explanation are you have to show there's positive evidence requirements. You have to show that it occurs. You have to show that it's uniform, meaning all children have access to it. And then the take-up requirement, meaning you have to show that children are actually taking this up. And then they go through some insufficient ways of acquiring a first language. So ways that maybe people think that children acquire their first language, but actually they don't. So they talk about imitation. The theory that children learn language by just imitating what they hear. And they say this is not sufficient because it doesn't explain the creativity children learn in language. The way children are able to say all sorts of things that they would never have the opportunity to hear. Then they go on to talk about explanation. And they say that this, explaining the grammar to the child, they say that this can't occur because by the time the child is old enough to understand the grammar explanation, then they've already acquired the language. They also talk about correction and expansion. And this is something that, again, Steven Pinker spends a lot of time talking about in The Language Instinct. The idea that parents think that they're helping their child acquire language by correcting the grammar mistakes, but actually it doesn't seem to have any impact at all. So yeah, it says, like explanation, correction could in principle compensate for the deficiencies in the positive evidence. Even if parents themselves don't supply negative evidence, they may react to the child's own mistakes. And then he says, this view of language acquisition as a process of teaching by adult correction is one that seems to be commonly held by parents. But then he goes on to explain why this is not the case. And again, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but he uses some of the exact same samples of language that were found in Steven Pinker, and which indeed pop up in a lot of these linguistic books. These are apparently very famous examples. Well, one example which seems to pop up in all books of this type is this one here, where a mother is trying to correct the child's grammar and the child is just not taking the correction. Yeah, it says, a famous exchange reported in McNeill 1966. So yeah, 1966. That was a while ago now. Seems to have popped up in every linguistics book since. But the child says, nobody don't like me. And the mother says, no, say nobody likes me. And the child says, nobody don't like me. And then apparently there's 8 repetitions of this dialogue. And in some other linguistic books I've read, they actually print out all 8 repetitions of the dialogue, and kind of seeing that visually represented, I think it is makes more of an impact, where the mother keeps repeating, say nobody likes me, and the child keeps responding with nobody don't like me. I guess they were trying to save space here, so they just said 8 repetitions of this dialogue, but it goes on for like 8 turns. Say nobody likes me, nobody don't like me, nobody likes me, nobody don't like me, nobody likes me. And then finally at the end the mother says, no, now listen carefully, say nobody likes me. And the child says, oh, nobody don't likes me. And so this is illustrated, used to illustrate in numerous books, including Steven Pinker's book, how even when the parents try to correct the child just doesn't take it up. The child apparently is not at all interested in learning grammar rules. Or at least they're not interested in learning grammar rules consciously. Their language acquisition device, their subconscious, is busy trying to kind of figure out the rules of the English language. But their conscious thinking part of their brain is not interested in learning the grammar rules, and so the child is like, what is she on about? What is this woman talking about? They're just so concentrated on their message that they're not uptaking any grammar correction. Sorry, just checking the time on the back of the camera. I've got a couple minutes left here. And so much more that I could potentially talk about here. Okay, so just try and go through this quickly here. So correction is not a means of learning language. Social interaction, they talk about, is not a means of effective means of learning language. Dependence on other facilities is not on other faculties is not an effective means of learning language. And then they summarize this in a table here. Some insufficient ways of acquiring UG, means universal grammar, from the environment in the L1. Now again, here I swear there's a typo here, a mistake. I don't know, let me know. They've got imitation, and okay, it's positive evidence, but it says it lacks the occurrence requirement and it lacks the uniformity requirement. But it doesn't lack occurrence, right? It does occur, it's just not uniform. That's got to be a mistake, right? Same for correction. They say it lacks occurrence and it lacks uniformity. But they just demonstrated in the previous pages that it does actually occur with some parents. It's not uniform, certainly, It doesn't appear to be effective, but it does occur. So why are they saying it doesn't occur?